If businesses or organizations in the public or private sector want to improve, they look for ways to gain efficiencies and try to improve their service to their customers or clients. Well, the City of Paducah is working to do the same thing. Up next, we're going to learn more about the Fire Prevention Division and its responsibilities. Up until 2012, the City of Paducah had a fire department and an inspection department. However, that year, the city decided to move all of the responsibilities of the inspection department and place them under the fire department in a new division called the Fire Prevention Division. Well, we want to know how the growing pains and the learning curve has been going. So we want to talk about the Fire Prevention Division with Paducah Fire Chief Steve Kyle. Hi, Chief.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining me. I know this is has been a big undertaking. You took in a whole nother department with the City of Paducah. Go back to 2012 and tell us a little bit about the timeline.
Sure. In February of 2012, the city manager asked us to take a look at maybe consolidating the department with the fire department. During that time, we thought there were some areas that we could focus on that might enhance the abilities of the department. At the time, there were some complaints and there were some struggles within the department itself. The leadership was vacant at that time, so it was an opportunity to look for changes that could maybe make the department more efficient. Some things that we looked at were customer service. That seemed to be an area that needed a lot of focus. We thought that the fire department's way of doing things, the customer service aspect of how we conduct ourselves might be something we could bring to the inspection department and use that in our interaction with the public. And it might give us a little bit more guidance and focus on the customer so that we can make it a more valuable experience for them, you know, in their interaction with us. Another thing we thought would benefit was the structure of the fire department. Fire department's a paramilitary structure. We have chain of command. We operate that way day in and day out. And a lot of times when you bring that thought process to another entity, it will give it better structure, increase efficiency, and allow people to operate a little more freely with their individual professions. And then we had familiarity with the inspection department. The fire department had a code division as well, where we went out and did inspections, had customer interaction, that kind of thing. So it wasn't an unfamiliar process to us. We had already some relationships with the inspection department. It gave us an opportunity to interact with them, and really thought it would be a good opportunity for the two departments to come together and be more efficient in the delivery of the services that they provide.
And I think that's where some people have had questions. When I've had a phone call into my office and they ask a question that I know goes to fire prevention, and I say that's the Fire Prevention Division, I think there's a confusion of fire prevention. Why would fire prevention have something to do with codes and code enforcement? But it's the same code that everybody operates under. It
is, and the tragedies that this country had very early on in the formation of it is what kind of drove the code to exist to begin with. The tragedies that we've had from fires, the Great Fire of Chicago, and there's numerous examples out there that have driven the codes to be developed, revised, and we're on a 3-year cycle now where we continue. That way we take into account things that change, and they're all tied together. So you had the fire code, the building code, and the electrical code, and they're all interrelated. They reference one another and other standards on common ground to tie the whole process together. So whether we were separate departments or not, we were still tied together by the nature of the code, and we had to understand the origins of each of the codes and how they apply to buildings.
And your previous background, you were a fire marshal, and that is the division that basically fire prevention has been pulled under, and that's where the code really gets pulled together.
Right, it is. The fire prevention code is what would be considered as the maintenance code, or the fire code is the maintenance code, and the building code obviously is the construction code, the building and electrical aspects of it, or the construction piece. So the two have to be tied together in order for the fire marshals out there to do an inspection on a building. They have to understand where the building came from, how it was developed, how it was built, in order to apply the fire code. So we have to be familiar with the building and electrical code, even though we don't work on the new construction side.
Okay. One of the other things that, one of the goals when you pull those departments together was efficiencies, trying to gain some efficiencies. And I think the inspection department was drowning in paper. Tell us what all you have been doing to try to, I guess, bring it up to the 21st century.
Yeah, we had copies of copies to have copies. A lot of paperwork. Technology at the time wasn't used in a wide format. So that was one of the first approaches we were able to take, was to try to see what we could do in the current budget cycle that we have to raise our technological interface with the systems that we have. We had employees that didn't have access to the system at all. We had there was equipment that they were lacking. So some of the first things we did was we went and got them equipment that they needed. Electrical inspectors need voltmeters, and they didn't have that. Building inspectors need flashlights to be able to see into dark areas while buildings under construction. Simple things like that. And then the other aspect was the interaction between the two, and them being able to enter information into the system that we have. We were only using about 5 to 10% of the capacity of the software system that we had at the time. And that's been a very lengthy process over the last couple of years, with 3 and 4 week-long trainings in that 2 years to increase that capacity. But we believe we're about 75 or 80% of the capacity of using the available technology that we have, and that we've had for a long period of time.
Has that helped to increase, I guess, plan review times and just getting back to the customer?
Yes. One example is we would require 2 sets of plans. And the plan reviewer would mark up one set of plans, and then we had an administrative assistant that would go copy the markups, physically copy them, write them on the second set of plans, for that set of plans to be returned to the submitting individual. So it ate up a lot of time. We couldn't receive plans electronically. We didn't have any digital storage. So, some of the things we've worked on in the last couple of years, we just require you to do one set of plans now. We mark up that one set, and then we save that set electronically, and then we give you that set back for you to have on your job. So just that one thing right there has cut out, a massive amount of time that at least administrative folks were doing, spending copying plans onto the second set, so we could maintain a copy in our archive.
That's incredible, just the use of technology, and that's something that a lot of the folks may not realize. Getting all of that technology together and the software together, it is a grand undertaking to try to pull all those plans into a database and scanning.
It was a two-pronged approach even. I mean, the fire marshal at the time is actually the division head, and a guy by the name of Greg Cherry. And he and I both went into this process expecting to have to be heavily engaged. So we took it from a two-pronged effect. He focused on the people and the operation itself, and I focused on the technology. And so that we could move both forward at the same time. What we found was we were going to very quickly get bogged down in one or the other in trying to identify systems or processes that we could improve, and then trying to implement those changes. It wouldn't allow for a lot of focus if you were trying to do two things at the same time.
In this department, Fire Prevention Division under the fire department, it's not an isolated department. You work with so many other departments. Explain the exchange of information that needs to go on within just City Hall.
Right, yes. We work with engineering and planning. Site plans have to go to engineering and also go to planning, be approved for zoning and things like that. And we do the building aspect. We do the building, and then planning and engineering do everything else.
Okay.
So, the way that kind of is supposed to work is plans come in, the site plans come in through engineering, work their way to zoning, and then we get the building plans after that. But a lot of times where we find ourselves is trying to do a simultaneous review. That is an attempt to benefit the customer so that they don't have to wait until their site plans and their zoning information gets approved to start the building review process. It allows it to be sped up. Okay. So while we can't issue the building permit without having the site plan and zoning information in hand, we can start to review and get that aspect of it done to try to make it go as quickly as possible.
And one thing that I've heard you say is call us often, stay in touch, ask questions, be engaged with fire prevention so that you can be engaged back with the customer.
Yeah, the thing that happens more often than not, by the time we are engaged, you're already ready to build.
Okay.
And the thing I would say back to that individual is you didn't decide to build that day when you came to talk to us. That process started a few months ago probably. Mm-hmm. So start that conversation with us then. Give us some kind of idea of what you're doing. That way we can give you some kind of idea maybe what some of the requirements are if you don't know. And then if you've got to involve an architect or an engineer, it gives them time to do their piece of the pie to keep the process moving along. So, if you walk in there to me today, you're ready to go to work, but I need 2 to 3 weeks to review your plan, you're going to be upset with me as a result of that. So we strive to try to have that information out there. Call us early, call us often, start that dialogue with us to give us an opportunity to be engaged with your process throughout, to help identify little hiccups that may impact the process of what you're trying to achieve, and to let you know those things that are gonna pop up that maybe that you weren't expecting. Handicap accessibility is one of those things. A lot of times people don't realize the requirements, and those aren't our requirements. Those are federal requirements that we have to follow up on to make sure they're met.
So you've had some folks that say, well, you're trying to hinder my project. And that's not your goal in any way.
No, everybody, most people don't look at the code as a benefit to the process of going through and building their building. If they do, that's great. I wish everybody did. But the way to look at it is a benefit to you. It protects you from some liability because you're building your building to a standard that's recognized out there. So if some kind of problem was to happen, people were injured or killed or anything like that, you have a recognized standard to what your building was constructed to. And in terms of insurance liability especially, making sure that the standards were met. It protects you. We make sure that your contractor builds the building the way it was specified. And it gives you an opportunity to have checks and balances that if the process didn't exist, that you wouldn't even have.
Well, let's go into a little bit about some of this process. What all does your fire prevention division do? I know plumbing is something that is not handled by fire prevention, but kind of what are the things that your division will do?
Well, we do electrical, mechanical, and building. The plumbing is handled by the state. So if you're going to, and that doesn't always, there's a lot of things that don't always require a permit, but more often than not, there is some type of permit that is required. We have 2 inspectors for building, we have 2 inspectors for electrical, and the mechanical falls into the building side, so those 2 guys cover that. But anytime you're getting ready to renovate a building, you should give us a call to see what the requirements are being. It may be simple. If you're painting, that's not going to be a big deal. But when you start talking about moving walls, installing doors, you're changing the layout of your building. You're probably adding circuits to your electrical system so that you've got access to all your electronic devices. That's probably going to require an electrical permit. So give us that call to see what you may or may not have to do. We'll guide you through the process. It doesn't always require a permit. It's just about the level of change that you're talking about doing. So, you come to us, talk to us about that. We can get to you fairly quickly. And that's the benefit of us being local. We can get to it quickly. It's where our counterparts at the state, they have very large territories that they cover all over the state. makes it difficult for them to get to jobs as quickly as we can because we're right here. And so there's a benefit to that. There's actually speed to that because we have the program ourselves.
Well, what are some of the things that would trigger a permit that you have in your office? Say if I owned a business and I was just going to maybe renovate the main floor of it where, say, it was a retail space. Do you have a lot of people that are calling with questions like, well, when does a permit get triggered?
Sure, that's what everybody want to know. And the downside is it depends. We have some general triggers that we can tell you about, but it does depend. First thing I want to tell you is a little bit about permits.
Okay.
They're based on the cost of construction. That's how it's formulated. So whatever your estimate is for construction, the permit is a percentage of that, and that's what you have to pay. You have several different inspections that are required through the process. We'll tell you what those are and when you can expect to call us or advise you on when you should call us. And then tell you about the remainder parts of the process is that you get a certificate of occupancy, which says you're legally able to inhabit that space. Okay. And tell you that your involvement as the property owner is key in the process so that you stay aware of the things that there's a lot of interaction that goes on between the inspectors, the architects, the engineers, and ultimately the contractor. And for the property owner's benefit, it helps us to have them engaged through the whole process so they understand where their project is at all times. Right. Sometimes it can get lost in the shuffle there. We all end up doing a little finger pointing because we're waiting on somebody in exchange of information. Yeah. But with the property owner directly involved, that helps keep that line of communication cleaner and the process moving along more efficient. So, we would like to take that opportunity to tell you about those things, while you're in front of us there to keep your project moving. Some things that trigger permits that are based on major changes, that trigger major changes are square footage, an occupancy change, type of occupancy that you have, fire protection thresholds, and then handicap accessibility is also one of the things. Well, and there's a lot of information to handicap accessibility. Yeah. It's not a Paducah rule, it's a federal rule, and we don't get any choice. We don't get any choice in any of this, but some of it is open to some interpretation, some engineering, able to achieve compliance through engineering, things of that nature. But the handicap stuff, it's pretty well, feds have it spelled out what you're going to do. So let's take square footage first. Okay. That's what drives the occupant load of the building. Okay, how many people you can have in the building, how many square feet you have it's a direct causal link to that.
Does it matter the type of use?
Well, it does. Okay. That's how square footage has many factors that go into it based on how you're planning to use the building. As an example, a business has less people than a place of assembly. Restaurant, gymnasium, any of those types of places. Their factors are different because they're based on having many people in them at one time. As an example for business, 100 or 10,000 square feet is something that is a major change. Mercantile, 100. Assembly, 100. Residential, 12 dwelling units or more. So you're getting those are major changes. Those are triggers out there that we recognize and look for. The design professional requirement to be implemented to have an architect or an engineer on your staff to submit plans. And then downtown renovations are also one of those things. You're hardly ever putting what we've seen in our downtown anyway. Hardly ever is something going in there that used to be there.
Right.
Okay. It's
sometimes you'll have like a retail store and another retail store, but a lot of times
more often than not, it's changed in some form or fashion. It's almost always going to have a design requirement, design professional requirement. Permits have to be pulled as a result.
And the fire protection, I know we've had some talk locally about just warming centers, cooling centers, and things like that. There is a sprinkler requirement based on like the type of assembly that you have.
Right. If you're planning on using a building for place of assembly, there's some triggers there that mandate that you have certain types of fire protection in place. A place of assembly, 5,000 square feet. You think about 5,000 square feet, that's not very large.
No, that's not a big restaurant, really.
That's not a big location. So if you're talking about it's being a warming center, you're going to have a restaurant or whatever the case might be, instantly, because it's a place of assembly, we have to have a conversation about sprinklers.
And that is a federal code or a state code?
That is the state building code.
That's the state building code.
Which is modeled after the international code.
Okay.
Okay. So, the state of Kentucky didn't come up with all this stuff on its own. They model it after the International Code Council that has a standard code making organization, and we adopt most of the code in its entirety. There are a few Kentucky changes, but for the most part we take the code in its entirety. Now let's talk about changes for just a minute. One of the things that the inspection department had a black eye for, or a reputation for, is that there were a lot of Paducah rules. And we did have some Paducah rules.
Meaning a rule that was for Paducah, but say if you went to a neighboring city, well, you wouldn't have that rule.
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's all been taken care of. We don't have any more Paducah rules anymore. We follow the state building code, and that's it. That's all that we have.
Well, I know that several things have come before the City Commission of changing our code to comply, so those have been removed.
Yeah, the most well known of those was we required conduit everywhere, and we don't anymore. Unless the code requires it, and the code does require them in some instances, we don't mandate that everywhere like we used to. Now back to fire protection there. Most, place of assembly was 5,000, as I mentioned. Most others, it's 12,000 square feet. So you can have a significantly larger building without having to have it sprinklered. Sprinkler costs it's an expensive addition to a building, but it's driven by the type of use that you want to have. So it's just things like that. If you did not have that type of knowledge going into, when you're trying to build a building or put a specific type of use into a building, that's where that consult ahead of time about calling us early, calling us often, we can advise you on those things and help steer you through that process.
Well, tell us a little bit more about the handicap accessibility. What are a few of the things that people need to be aware of? Say if somebody was going to renovate a business, that some items that they may not be thinking of.
Well, first thing you need to realize is there's no grandfather clause for handicap accessibility. Okay, if you go into a building, there's no grandfather clause for what was there existing. If you're changing the use or altering the space in which the restroom falls, it has to be upgraded. Okay, the feds mandate 20% of the construction go towards accessibility.
That's a big percentage.
That's
it sounds
a big
like.
percentage. It's an eye catcher, and I think probably most people probably feel like that's something that's on us, but we don't get any choice in this matter. We have a program with the expanded jurisdiction where we can provide inspection services and plan reviews, but as part of that, we have to inspect and make sure that handicap accessibility is met. An example for that is an assembly space that's being renovated, mandated to have 2 bathrooms for accessibility, 1 for each space.
Okay.
The exception is if you move into a space that was mercantile and you open a mercantile and you don't do any renovation, you don't have to update anything. But if you start moving anything, walls, you do anything much more than paint, you're going to have to do some handicap accessibility upgrades.
So some of these buildings that, say, I've gone into, maybe downtown, they may have one tiny little bathroom area. They haven't gone through any major renovation, and so it hasn't triggered that need to get into accessibility.
Right.
But if they do decide to get into some major renovation, then.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that you realize, and I think everybody probably has a personal story, is that is the accessibility is about giving access more than to just handicap.
Oh, right.
You start talking about the elderly or anybody that has any challenges at all in walking or gaining access to a building. It helps that greatly. I've had personal experiences here recently where that type of accessibility has directly impacted me and made my life easier. So, it gives the business benefit, but what you see early on in the project is the cost. And if you've got a budget for what you're planning to do and having to go outside of that budget, it can impact that. And that's where, it can start to cause some problems for the individual trying to do a project.
Well, you want this division to be viewed as a resource, don't you? And that people can contact fire prevention to get the information that they need. Not a division to be scared of.
No, not at all. And the other thing I would tell people is don't be scared to ask a question or to challenge us or ask for an alternative. That's as much a part of our job as it is anything, is to help you understand why you have to do something. Sometimes I'm not going to pretend that we know everything. There are times where we've got to get the book out and research it just like you would, and that's okay. But don't hesitate in calling and asking something. We understand the economic process. We want to be partner to it, not a hindrance to it, and know that it's very important for our community to have development. So we're trying to look out for you as the customer or the property owner trying to do the project. Make sure you get a good project that'll have a long tenure here in Paducah, and make that process as painless as it can be.
Well, we appreciate all the work that you're doing there in fire prevention. Any quick last-minute items that you want to talk about? Any next goals that you're working on? Well,
I think the next goals for us is to have more technological availability where you can get more things in real time. Some of the feedback that we've gotten from contractors is when we have someone go out on site, if they can immediately have information back to them about whatever the follow-up was, any changes that have to be made, that would be very beneficial for them, and for them to be able to receive that electronically. So we haven't had that availability, but those are things that are on the horizon for us. It's something that I didn't mention that I would encourage people to attend, especially the contractor world. This is our third year of holding a contractor class where we have an electrical piece, we have a building piece, and we have a fire piece, because fire is kind of what we're all about anyway. But that's a location or an opportunity for a contractor to become more familiar with what the requirements are, and it's been free.
Free, yes.
So
it's a day-long conference, usually in October.
It's about code changes. We usually host it in October. Up until now, it's been a one-day conference. But those individual classes on the building code and the electrical code, I think, have been key in helping expand our relationship with the contracting community so that they better understand our role. We learn the code together because our people are there too. And that way you have less opportunity for misunderstanding out in the field, and the contractor gets to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. The code professionals that are out there. The people that we're bringing in are people that have been a part of the code writing committees. So it's a huge opportunity for the contractor and for us to get that information firsthand, see the genesis of where these changes come from, and give us some assistance in how to apply them. So we would certainly extend that invitation to the contracting community to attend our next event, most likely going to be October of next year, to help increase their level of knowledge and increase our working relationship with them in the future.
Well, I have attended a couple of those workshops, and those conferences are great networking opportunities, great food, great classes. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing with the Fire Prevention Division, and keep up the good work, Chief Kyle.
Well, thank you. Just to let everyone know, we're happy to take questions at any time, and feel free to give us a call.
And we will. So if you want to learn more about the Fire Department and the Fire Prevention Division, you can visit the website, paducahky.gov, or just give them a call. They're in City Hall. The Fire Prevention Division is on the first floor of City Hall. Well, I want to say thank you so much for watching Your City at Work. As a reminder, this episode can be found on Government Channel 11, also the city's website, paducahky.gov, and the YouTube channel. Thank you so much.